Okay, everyone. So I see a few new faces. So for those people, thank you for coming along to watch this group's work. There's been about 20 people working on this over the last 3 days, including sort of PhD students, academics, which we'll describe as senior industry figures in exploration, and a variety of backgrounds, sort of geologists, engineers, environmental scientists, economists, all sorts of sort of interesting backgrounds, right? So the idea is to look at the future of exploration, and inherently that's also looking at the future of mining. And to do that, it's my view as a PhD student, my research, that we need to do this in a more holistic manner involving a more diverse group of minds, and that this is the technique I've chosen. So these workshops are an iterative process, so this is the third in a three-stage process, where stage one was me doing some work by myself. Stage two was a couple of weeks ago, a small group of PhD students within the CET developed some scenarios. I think some of you came along to see those. Stage three is our first sort of what we're calling an external expert group. And most people do seem to be experts, so that's okay. And then the final stage is a fourth expert group, which will be in 2 weeks, who will present sort of the final set of scenarios. So each scenario's workshop develops its own set of scenarios, which then merges with the previous work. So you have a sort of iterative building up process. So the final set presented next week will be sort of owned by 50, 60 people probably, from a variety of backgrounds. So hopefully it has that sort of prerequisite sort of holistic thinking. Anyway, so I think enough of me. It's time to give people a chance to show what they've been doing for 3 days. So I believe Siobhan's going first. So Siobhan's going to lead off, and then you get on with it.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So it's quite obvious that the mining and exploration sector faces a lot of key challenges that are all linked. So you can see them there. And so we brought in this really diverse group of people to consider all of them. And we resulted in 2 different scenarios that we're presenting, and then how you predict those, etc. So at the moment, we have very confused perceptions of the mining and exploration industry, and this is about how we communicate to our stakeholders, how we communicate to the wider community. So I guess generally the mining and exploration sector communicates a lot to their stakeholders and their investors, but maybe doesn't focus so much on their reputation to the wider public. And often there's conflicting stories that the public will hear, because this industry has 2 masters: what they're telling their investors and the message that they're giving to wider society. And all of this is tied into whether people in this industry actually have competence in being able to communicate and market themselves in the work that they do. So this industry is also tied with a lot of broken promises, whether they're spoken or unspoken. There's a lot of economic disparity in the places that are mined and explored. And this might result from the structure of the industry itself, or the nations and the governments that are being worked within. And there's also a lot of environmental degradation, so we're trying to work on that. And a lot of this is to do with our skills. So within the mining industry, we're always trying to focus on the technical skills, but we haven't really focused a lot on our engagement and communication skills, and arguably this is becoming more and more important. So in this scenario planning, we really wanted to start a positive loop and figure out what happens when you embrace or ignore some of these issues. So you'll see a scenario where maybe we don't do so well, and another scenario where somehow we manage to get it all right. So I will bring the next person up.
Thank you. Hi everyone. This is the first scenario that we put together, one of two that was discussed. The future of mining, and the scenario is called A Tale of Two People. In 2016, there are two, as of today, there are two types of people out there. There are the haves and the have-nots. Haves? Have-nots. Now, the way we've presented it in this is we have pictures of haves, have-nots, and the implication for mining. At the moment, we have large mines operating profitably or not profitably, as the case may be. 2025. The gap of inequality between people grows larger, and you have the haves. They control and use most of the resources. They are almost frivolous in what they do. The have-nots live on the margins. They strive to eat and to live and to have a life. In this situation, in the mining situation, we lead to mega mining companies. In the environment there is no regulation because the have-nots are not important to the haves, and the haves control all the resources. So essentially they can mine and pollute as they choose. But as time goes by, grades drop and mega mining corporations come into existence. 2014. At some point, the have-nots pass a critical point, and the haves can no longer control the world. The elites are killed off. Essentially, they no longer exist. But in this revolution, the haves or the have-nots don't have the capacity to keep their society running at the level of technology that there was. And so they regress, essentially into a very primitive society. And mining becomes manual. And it's done as an artisan. What's an interesting point is that this picture is only 20 years old. So this isn't that far in the future. We're closer to this than it might be obvious. The learnings for mining companies or the mining industry is you've got to keep an eye on society outside of your technical and commercial situation, because that can happen really, really quickly. Thank you.
Fear not. All is not lost. Technology will save us. In our world, we're about stabilizing our world and securing our future. In the future, we see the positive role of technology driving several things. The first thing is that the social backlash related to climate change is profound enough that it drives a war against fossil fuels that ends up the only place to go is now nuclear technology. And nuclear technology becomes acceptable because we move to thorium reactors. And thorium reactors actually consume the waste of uranium reactors. So you have a uranium-thorium double system, and you use the plutonium and the waste products from the uranium reactors and use that to dope the thorium. And the thorium is totally recyclable. So you now have recyclable energy forever. And this is scalable, You can also create thorium batteries this way and put them into spacecraft. We also have scalable 3D printing. This is a 3D printed building which occupies the size of a small island. All of this will be possible in the future. But the other thing that happens is the carbon fiber technology is now also moves to scale. We can now sequester the products of and use our hydrocarbons in different ways. And in fact, this replaces bulk commodities. We no longer need steel. We no longer need major infrastructure materials because we can build them out of waste, because it's now a carbon-based structural society. We have the perfect balance now between humanity and the environment, and this generates the natural outcomes of equality and trust. There is no poverty. We have solved, through our technical work, agri-tech developments that create abundant food supply. We have also have an environment where knowledge and wisdom are become valued more than money. Everybody is now working and walking in the same direction. The world is innovative, and niche mining is now only needed for the niche commodities, no, not the bulk commodities. This is only to supplement what we can't regenerate from recycling. And precious metals and diamond markets crash because adornment is no longer seen as necessary, and precious metals and diamonds are only seen for their physical property uses. Knowledge and wisdom become valued more than money. So we start to stabilize the climate. We have the abundant food. And in this political environment, we come together as a planet for the first time. And the UN finally becomes a global government. We are now a unified, single people on our planet. And we can start to turn our minds to the future of humanity rather than just the future of individual societies. A very important occurrence happens in 2050 is that exploration of Mars declares Mars a dead planet. This actually creates an environment where the greenies cannot complain if we go and mess around with it. Okay? And the messing around that we have to do is to terraform it into an alternative place to live. Because the biggest risk for humanity long term is mass extinction. And that is, we know as geologists, happens every 300 million years or so. So if we want to survive into the future, we need to actually have alternative planets to live on, and Mars will be the first one. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's abundant materials in the asteroid belt, but some of the key materials will be things like water. So we will bring metals and water to Mars and actually impact them onto the surface of Mars. And that impacting will also be part of the terraforming, so we'll form basins where we need basins, and we'll form mountains where we need mountains. And then we will mine the ore bodies that we've actually thrown at the planet to create the things that we need on the planet's surface. And we will create an atmosphere by sequestering the frozen atmospheres of the outer planets and moving them to Mars. Once we have done that, effectively, the mining industry is now off-planet. The major role for mining industry in the future will be terraforming of other planets for human colonization. Space mining launches at full scale, and eventually we can live outside of the solar system. That's the end of scenario 2.
Alright, so we have two completely different scenarios. One is a utopia. The other one is basically complete chaos and collapse of society as we know it. And so our task was to actually go through and look at signals in different forms. So you have weak signals, you have medium signals, I guess you would call it, with a medium, like a medium style signal. And finally you have a very strong and apparent signal that everything is either going well or going horribly wrong. And so, in terms of the tale of two people, there are beginnings where we'll start off with the most obvious one, where you have the champagne glass of inequality. You have people who are really poor, and you have people where all of the money is getting funneled up into a very small proportion. It's not entirely stable. In our case, we also have R&D spending begins to go down because regulations are starting to be pulled away. Corporations maybe have a hand in terms of influencing the politics itself, so they no longer have to take cleaner ways to deal with things. But you also have governments that are starting to get paranoid too. So in my case, where I come from, the NSA loves to listen to everything that we talk about. And so it starts going into sort of a very secret two-tiered system of inequality.
Thank you. But in our world, and I see that the UWA is not in our world yet, with my laser pointer. Some of the weak signals are this open growth of open source, say things like using computer power that can be located anywhere in the world, people power, other resources, information being stored kind of in the cloud or whatever, but being accessed by people. Some of the weak signals could be sort of like collaborations globally for tasks or for what are probably considered scientific, investigative kind of whims, but ultimately not knowing where it's going to get us. But God particle collaboration of teams, virtual teams, and all that, but working on things that maybe don't know what a tangible result is right now, but sometime in the future. So there's some of the weak signals of something, a genesis of like an I world.
So obviously some very early warning signals that are really going to start cropping up is you're going to begin to see technological differences. So whether they're military, so hence the lightsaber versus the club. Look what the U.S. is doing now in the Middle East. We have smartphones, we have all of this technology that we can try to enforce our policies. They, from our perspective, are still using AK-47s, Kalashnikovs that the Russians got from the Russians, but still, it's still a huge quagmire. So the question is as this begins to happen, who would win? Thousands and thousands and thousands of a Roman Imperial Legion, or 1,000 U.S. Marines? And so maybe that's what we're beginning to see coming out of the Middle East areas. Also some early warning signs, the Great Firewall of China, right? So stop that information, you have that information gap. Nothing's that you find as the government considerably, influencing the minds that may cause a coup of some sort. You can stop that right there, and that's technologically advanced. But what's also important too is to recognize that your poorer populations are graduating from universities at a much lower rate than your considerable counterparts, either from the elites or from the non-poor students.
For iWorld, it's like in A Tale of Two People with R&D spend down, but in iWorld, R&D spend is possibly increasing, most likely increasing. The importance of R&D is that things come out of the other end, they don't know exactly where to be investing the R&D, but you must be doing the R&D in order to give yourself the best chance to have the new learnings coming out. In order to do that, we've got, from an education point of view, is that you need to be investing also in the education of the society. So an overall societal increase in the levels of education. From a trust point of view, is now where the world is working together, collaboratively, symboled by United Nations here. So a collective group of people that, for the benefit of the whole society, meeting regularly, making decisions, planning for the future. And then, an element of trust. Society is diverse, it's very diverse. The wall being like, barriers that come above, but there's a collective move to get over any barrier that might be in place and to help the people. So to look back over your shoulder and help those coming up in order that everyone is moving to the greater good.
Quite self-explanatory here. In my world, all men must die. All cows must die.
And equally in Blue Sky, and the image of Star Trek, and great imagery of very diversified group of people, all equal but different, all moving for the greater good. But I think in this world, space need not be the final frontier, because in this world there is no such thing as a problem that won't be overcome. Not knowing, you don't need to know what the problem is, and you don't need to know when it's coming. You have the whole society have a belief and some kind of methodology that they will overcome it. And that's it.
What we do now is try to pull that together and bring it back to the now. We've started at the top of this diagram, which is the future, obviously, and we won't talk about the transition event because that's the event we don't know, and between now and transition, we don't know how long that's going to be. So conceptually, having developed our two scenarios, the iWorld, Tale of Two Peoples, accepting that there will be a transition period, what do we do in the now to ensure that we're ready for that in the future?
Alt-tab twice.
Sorry?
Alt-tab.
Tab.
And then do it again.
No.
Okay. Close.
Now what do I do? Technology, the new world gets, but I don't. It's not that hard, it's just an arrow. So we'll talk through it in our context, in terms of mines today, the existing assets that we own, and what they'll look like and how we need to move forward. So the two scenarios, we've basically got the four pieces up here, miners of today and explorers of today. In that Tale of Two Peoples world we saw, it is actually a slow, obviously for mining, a slow decline, and our mines aren't renewed, but small scale miners are allowed to thrive effectively. What does that mean for explorers? In that scenario, there's sort of no access to technology to improve our exploration, but those miners, the things that are developed, are those that have the local, have trust on the ground, and are allowed to, or are given access to that ground. Whereas in iWorld, the current miners, the actual mines are increased through technology, and by increase I mean the yield and the productivity. Importantly, the acceptance of them, which allows them to grow as well, and allows for the longevity to grow. The explorers become more efficient, and hence exploration becomes more successful as a result of the reliance on technology. But if we bring it more directly back to the explorers and their search space, how does our access to opportunity change in the future and under these scenarios? The two peoples, clearly there's limited access to ground, and almost sort of limited access to opportunity, because the opportunity set itself becomes smaller. The explorer is very similar to what we've just covered as well. As we've seen under those different scenarios, what it is we're exploring for and how we're exploring. It's not just how we're exploring for it that changes or that improves, or we can understand that one, the access to technology clearly being important, but understanding that technology and where it's leading us, and the ability to be nimble to pick up on those new opportunities, whether it be thorium or any other new important element, is clearly important too. What does the corporate entity look like? Under two peoples, clearly it's a smaller, nimble, local, almost a cottage industry. They have to have that on the ground contact. They have to be part of the local community. So as you saw, big mining guys. Explorers, in a similar way, they need the relationships on the ground. But it changes the face of what they're exploring for and the difficulty they do it because they don't have access to technology. The larger multinationals thrive in iWorld, as we've seen, and the explorers take over, effectively become the exploration force for those guys, and feeding into the larger mining groups and develop a symbiotic relationship. And we'll talk, as you'll see, we talk a lot about the relationships and how the different parties feed off each other and work together. The people, we've picked it up as the professions. We saw that the two peoples very well educated, so you become the technocrats become the elite and are in demand. The explorers, because of that relationship that they need on the ground and the acceptance, the trust they need from the local community, they're the perfect professional, or the group there has an equal, they understand the mix, they understand the importance of CSR. They become more than just implementers of technologies, but they become communicators, and authentic communicators, so they develop that relationship. In iWorld, the technology clearly important. Trust is maintained through communication, and essentially through the success of that larger miner and their adoption of technology. How does the explorer survive in iWorld? They need a real-world relevance, which is something we picked up early in the piece on this that links to a lot of the scenarios. The higher education is clearly important because of the reliance on technology and the use of new technology and the ability to keep up with new technology that we talked about earlier. But real-world relevance, we picked up in a few areas where we talked about authenticity and the relationships. So the real-world relevance becomes increasingly important to explorers. So that they can develop relationships with the man on the land, is the easiest way to think of it, with empathy and authenticity. So the hop, step and jump that we've wanted to do here is, having talked about how those outcomes or how those scenarios may impact in the future, what do we do today? What builds a robust company today? While this is titled strategy, what strategy should we be implementing now? It's more about how do we build a robust entity such that we can enter one of these worlds. Both of those worlds were quite different. And we really break it down into some quite simple pieces. Surprisingly to me, and maybe surprisingly to you, you saw the complexity of some of those earlier scenarios. Where we came to on a robustness basis, it is about people, and we've gone through this in sort of reverse order. First I talked about the assets and what we'll be mining and exploring for. It's the people that are important here, and it's how those teams work. So the robust explorer or the robust miner of today is building a multidisciplinary team. So a fair mix of people with a higher education and real-world experience. Not a notional mix, but a fair mix. And we've seen that as actually very high, such that our classic or our traditional miners are actually only a small proportion of that multidisciplinary team. On that team, you've got people who are very good communicators. They're working together openly, so there's a focus on collaboration and moving towards what is a CSR skilled workforce rather than a mining skilled or technologically skilled workforce. The companies are led, and their first involvement is through a CSR skilled workforce. The companies themselves develop symbiotic relationships at a number of levels. The majors and explorers, so miners and explorers, cooperate. They realise how they work together and how they need to work together. There's also a clear relationship built between the mining group or the explorers and government. Government relationships become very important, where you saw the sort of the United Nations becoming important in our world versus basically sort of tribal leaders in the two people's world. It is the ruling party, the government, the relationship with that government becomes increasingly important, and that's built into how we start to do things now. Those relationships, and we talked a lot about collaborative relationships, clearly built on trust. That's the basis that moves us forward all the time. It's core to business success. Locals understand what a mining company is doing and why it's there. They truly understand it. They know why they're there, and they understand the benefit of having that mine where they are. Whether that's very local, as in the two people scenario, where they need a commodity as much as they need food to live, or where it's not local at all in the iWorld scenario, but we understand the need to be moving into outer space. The new asset, so what are we doing to build our asset portfolio? So what is a new asset going to look like post that transition into one of these new scenarios? What we've seen in that is there's actually an improved sample set, an improved number of opportunities, so an increased number of assets. They don't look like what we're used to today. They've come about through improved access to land, through the relationships we've built, and they've come about through changes in technology. So what it is we're exploring, why we're mining for something or what we're mining, where, will change. And it's being abreast of that technology and that agility that keeps companies at the forefront. So the robust company embraces technology and fosters development of that new technology so that they understand it as we move forward. That's where we ended. Thanks.
So let me go through that quite quickly. So there's sort of a bit of time for questions for people who have come from the outside and are kind of probably quite curious to what on earth the process is here and how you go from sort of something so kind of abstract and creative to sort of trying to get some kind of useful strategy from it. And there's possibly also some things that people in the group themselves have a kind of questions they want to ask or issues they want to raise or just things they want to say. So kind of, I'll open it up for sort of questions, stroke comments type thing. to which I will field what I can, and some things I may kick to the team to field as well. So anyone has anything they want to say or ask?
How did you go just doing this in 3 days? Was it pretty tight? Was it
I would, how does the team feel as a 3-day process? Very hard work, I would say.
It's hard work, but possible.
Yeah.
Well, I think 3 days is enough. You wouldn't want to go longer because then you just get.
You're going to start having, actually, if I'm completely honest, usually by the time I finish this, I'm exhausted. But as in, like, I've been working really, really hard. I'm physically quite tired. So it also gives you somewhat of a headache. I'm sure you saw from Aaron and Liz, already, they on a particularly difficult task of taking what are really quite clearly outlandish scenarios or stories, science fiction stories, and trying to bring them down to real kind of like, okay, this is a metaphor for where we're going, like, what am I actually doing? And this kind of constantly going back and forth between sort of creativity and sort of a real result is, I don't know, it's hard work. And also, the vast majority of us are scientists and engineers, this isn't what we do. So
You couldn't do it in less than 3 days, but the first 2 days, the problem with it is it's not a problem with it, the first 2 days are reasonably light, and the third day is hard. But you definitely wouldn't want to take an extra day to do the third day, or and it's sort of a bit pointless cutting, trying to. I think we sort of did. It's really 2 6-hour days and an 8-hour day is the way to knock it off.
there's a sort of leave it at the stage where it kind of needs to be taken a bit further is probably about the right stage, if you know what I mean. It's sort of, we're heading towards an answer is probably about where you want to stop, because then it becomes, certainly in my opinion, my PhD, I need to go take each of these scenario sets away and actually think about, so I'm looking at copper exploration, right? I need to think about, what does this mean for copper exploration? That's going to take me a long time to sit down and do that. It's just 6 months of work on that. And I don't know, evolution is going to sort of think about what does it actually mean for us? And that, just even trying to work that out is a bit of a long process. This is probably, for me, I feel about the right stage to start wanting a bit more. Anybody else want to
having been involved in the one 2 weeks ago as well, what it really does is it plants a lot of seeds in your head that you keep thinking over afterwards, so that like a week later you're still thinking about what it means. So the hardest part, I agree, is bringing it down to what does it mean strategically? How do I have to behave to prepare myself for multiple possible futures, which is what scenarios are about. And that keeps going in your head. It's like doing some exercise and your body is still burning calories after you stop, your brain is still turning it over. So I found it really quite helpful in that sense.
I think it's probably what sort of happens with each workshop as well is that they're quite good for surfacing the things that. So when we started doing this, when people start looking at the scenarios, everybody wants to write about technology. This comes over time, and that's because for scientists, for engineers, we're at university, we're research focused. For companies, we're trying to be on the leading edge, the cutting edge, win, etc., etc. Right? So everyone starts writing about technology, and within 10 minutes, you've got AI, nanotechnology, robotics, automation, genetics, all the usual kind of stuff, right? So everyone wants to talk about that. That's cool. So that's why you get the credit scenarios. But in doing that, everyone realises they have to talk about something else. So it was interesting that the last workshop, which Cam was talking about, really was actually all about the energy transition. So whether you agree with the various views about renewable energy and climate change and all these kind of things, if you want to talk about technology, you have to know about that subject. You have to be kind of competent and sort of be able to speak and understand it and communicate with it. So it was like a 3-day workshop in sort of, well, how does the mining industry deal with the energy transition, right? So that's kind of what came out of that one. This one has been very much more, I don't know if it's something to do with the group or whatever. There was a real interest in sort of very much the social license side of things, and the kind of reputation was a really big thing that came up, and sort of how this mixes with education and technology. Like, are we the right people to be doing this kind of thing? Are we going in the right direction? So that seems to be the broad theme of this workshop, and I suspect that we're going to get in 2 weeks. So
Yeah, John, a question for you.
Yes.
I'm picking up on something that Cameron was. What's your aim? And sorry, you probably told me, or maybe I should know, but are you developing a process here, or are you looking for an output?
Both, actually.
Yeah, because to overlay this, to take sort of Cam's response at that next step, where and sort of to answer that, was 3 days enough type of thing. Well, the process was great to have done the 3 days. To deliver to you the output, is of some use, of some interest maybe, but going through the process is great, and I think Cam, that's right. Sets you up now, sets me up for the next week, the next month, maybe even the next 12 months. Sort of just churn over that. So I think that your process, John, is really important. Could be really important to a large range of corporates or individuals. The output is going to be bloody hard for you to really.
Yeah, and to be honest, the output for all of us is going to be hard, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, that's the hard bit, right? So, my vague understanding of these kind of scenario processes and strategy at a wide level is the kind of doing strategy is actually quite easy, right? Whatever the process is, right, whichever consultants coming in or whichever intervention they're making, right, it's been sort of evidence this last week. The creating the scenarios bit and doing the workshop and having it together is the easy bit. The hard bit is, for me, was actually, it took me almost 18 months to 2 years to realise that the problem I was trying to take on, I can't solve that problem. I need to find a way to get a whole lot of people together to solve the problem for me in a way that I then get the answer I want.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then
but to do that, then I have then a problem that I get. So why are people going to help me like that? Turns out there's some really good people in CET and in our community to do that. That's great. That's fine. But also, there is creating a communal benefit here in that there's a group of people by the end of these 3 workshops who will be sharing a bit of a language, and none of us, as we've highlighted, are experts on CSR and social license and global inequality and all these kind of things, but we now at least we have a few tools to talk about it with and to have a sort of think about it with, and maybe when we meet some experts on that subject, we've got something to talk about. And I certainly feel confident enough that I will try and turn these into papers. Right? I feel confident enough that I could write a paper on how sort of the way we look at skills and technology and education and how we can use that as both a disabling factor for the future and an enabling factor for the future. And I feel I've got enough ground to stand on to do that, right? So that's helped me, and hopefully it sort of helped you in developing your strategy, or maybe people looking at research. I've been chatting with Ada, who's a PhD in tailings management, which is saying actually this is a way for us to both work on as an explorer, and someone looking at the tailings industry, to actually look at the problem together, sort of from the 2 ends of the industry. We've got these 2 scenarios to kind of, as our communal language, to kind of do this with, right? So there's some kind of benefits to other people, and don't forget, of course, I'm going to benefit from this, so I'll make sure I'll do that. So any other comments or questions, or people need a beer?
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, for me, the most important statement you made at the beginning was that you're not trying to predict the future. And so don't try and do that. This is following a line of deduction, whichever way you start, you can do it from both directions. But the value of this was not in the actual scenario itself, but when you started putting all the scenarios together, and then started to combine them and to give you two main stories. A lot of factors, a lot of people were saying a lot of the same things, maybe in different ways, and you start to get a pattern. And for me, it's the pattern that's important. The scenario in itself is, it's a story. But the way I work, a lot of, when you're working with uncertainty, which is what we're talking about here, a lot of it is intuitive. You get an intuition from past experience, patterns, etc. that you've developed. And this just gives you more patterns to work with. When you're intuitively going forward and trying to work out what my next short-term or medium-term strategy is, this is something that will now pop up. That's my value in this. And so that's what I would see the actual benefit of it is.
So that was broadly kind of, I kind of came to this, and that's why I wanted to do scenarios, other than being encouraged to do it by some people who do a lot of mining strategy and suggested that would be a good way, is that it is kind of obvious that the way of looking at the future isn't, in a sense, forecasting. It's just asking smart questions and kind of being ready and prepped and sort of being able to see things as they arrive and be able to deal and cope with them. The exercise that in some ways kind of proves this is the slightly hokey networking exercise we can do at the beginning, which is to get everyone to bring a book that they will inform the group something about the future of the industry and of mining and sort of exploration and kind of what would you know, what's your kind of recommendation to the group? And in a group that is largely scientists and engineers, it is almost entirely fiction or creative works or non-fiction works on a kind of very side kind of things, because people are trying to say, oh, we're not talking about this, we're not talking about this. You know, you learn more about the future from reading George Orwell than you do from reading, you know, as a former worker of Crew Group, the Crew Group forecasts of commodity prices over the next 5 years. But, you know, there's a sort of a problem with that. We kind of know that, it's just we've kind of got to accept that we've got to, this leads us down a different path where we start creating graphs with trends on, and we start saying what we actually want to know and talk about. But it turns out, in this case, we want to talk about community conflict and how we're not using technology or enabling disabling inequality. You know, some people have some interesting views in it. If there's not any other comments, I don't want to ramble over it.
Can the group that was involved today, can we all go over to the right side so that I can take a picture from that arch for the group?